Hello and welcome to this week's tutorial. My name's Jamie, and this week we're going to be taking a look at sapling, the one of the add-ons for Blender 2.59. So as long as you've got 2.59 or above, then you should be fine to follow this along. So yeah, you can use sapling to quickly create trees, and it generates, sort of based on a set of parameters, a different random sort of shape. So I'll show you how to quickly set that up. So with controller U, if I've actually got it selected, there we go. We can go to add-ons and then go to add curve, and under here you can see sapling. Just need to turn that checkbox on and you can exit off. I don't need this default cube or anything. I can just go straight to Shift A, then go to curve and add tree. And if you're an experienced Blender user, or even still a basic Blender user, you'll notice that the tree just creates at the origin of the world. Normally, when you're adding something to a scene, it'll be added at the 3D cursor, but that's not the case with sapling, so just bear that in mind. If you're making lots of trees, you're going to have to move them out of the way or move them onto different layers and stuff. So I'm just bringing this out to show you all that's going on. There's a lot of options to go through. All these down here. I'll probably just gloss over the less important ones, but I'll try to keep this as concise as possible. So I'll start at the top of the settings. This checkbox here is for Bevels, and if you don't have that checked, then all you've got are these curves that don't render or anything. As soon as you check that, it bevels the curves and gives you some geometry to actually texture and render and stuff. So that's quite useful. Can turn up bevel resolution to increase the amount of vertices going around. As you can see down the bottom, it gets smoother the more that you have. I usually have that at about 4, so it's fairly rounded. And then under here you got handle type. The best way to think of it is animated and not animated. So if you're not going to animate your tree and you want some nice smooth branches that look alright, that auto will be fine. But if you want to animate your tree using these animation options down the bottom, I'll even show you here. It all goes a bit whacked out. I think it's just there's too much information for the armature to properly follow. So leave it on vector if you want things to be animated, and you can increase the amount of smoothness along these branches at a later point anyway. So it's not too much to worry about. So the shape here is sort of like preset, sort of a starting point for you to go from. That you just sort of go through them and pick one that sort of matches the general tree shape that you're going for, and then you can work on that as you go along, and go through all the things and make it exactly as you want it. The random seed is just a way to generate a random new tree from the parameters that you've already all got set. So if I just turn these through, it's got the general flame shape, but it's sort of different shapes and sizes as well, different arrangements of branches and stuff. So I'll just stick with 0. The ratio is, I believe, the base size compared to the height of the tree, I think. So at 0.015 it's, smallish trunk compared to, how completely tall it is. I've usually got that at about 0.02, maybe 0.03, a little bit thicker, depending on what you want your tree to look like. The scale is the maximum height of the tree. So that's in blender units, so it sort of gives you an idea of how tall your tree is going to be at 13 blender units. If you're using the one blender unit is 1 meter, then that's 13 meters, and you can go taller or really short. Great little bonsai tree if you want. The scale variation is the amount of difference between the seeds. So with scale variation of 3, I believe it will go 3 above or 3 below that 13, so between 10 and 16 every time you generate a seed. That's why you see such big differences at the moment in those different seeds. But if I set that to 0, as I go through the seeds, you'll see the height doesn't actually change anymore, it just sort of changes shape. And then the radius scale is the scale of the trunk radius, so it's to do with this ratio and the radius of the trunk. So I mean, it's easy to see as you scale, turn that up, the base of the trunk gets thicker. So generally best to just leave that at 1. And radius scale variation allows the thickness to change for the seeds as well. I haven't had much luck with exporting any presets, so I don't know if that's me or anything. It might just be a bug or something. I haven't looked into that too much yet. All of this stuff that I'm showing here is just stuff that I've figured out myself, so I could be doing something wrong. But the presets here in the drop down box, they work quite nicely. You can quickly load in a tree. If I turn the bevel on so you can actually see it, and then turn on a couple of levels of branches, you can see it's quite nice. It's a weeping willow shape that's going on. Sorry, it's just loading. As you get up these levels here, it does get quite intensive on your computer, and that doesn't appear to make much difference anyway. So if I just turn that down, so yeah, for a weeping willow, you probably just want the 3 levels here. Yeah, it looks fine. For most trees, I don't really go past this 3 levels anyway. But I'll just delete this and bring in a new tree so that I'm going off all this. It's all fine. So yeah, the branch splitting levels, at 1 you've got your 1 trunk, and then at 2 you've got the main branches for your tree, and at 3 you get all the smaller branches coming off those main branches, and then at 4 you get all those really small twigs that come off that last level of branches. So it's sort of levels of detail is a good way to think of it. 3 is usually more than enough because you're going to be adding a bunch of leaves to each of these branches anyway, so it's going to be quite thick. But if you do want to go all the way, you can go to 4 levels. For now, I'm just going to sit at 2. Base splits, as you can see there. I'll just turn that down. It splits the actual trunk rather than just adding branches, which is quite cool, and you can turn that up to some silly number if you want. Sometimes it's nice to have 1. Base size is, think of it as the trunk is a line from 0 to 1 at the top, and this number is where the actual branches start coming out. So at point 4 along the number line, that's where point 4 is, and that's where the branches start coming out. So as you adjust that, you see the branches come out. Generally in a sort of a heavily forested area, it's probably going to be a bit lower if there's not a lot of movement going through. But if there's a lot of people moving around underneath, then you probably want that to be higher and stuff. So that's just something to think about. most of these are fairly self-explanatory. The branches, these 4 boxes for each of these is in relation to the level. So on level 2 there's 50 branches being generated, and on level 3 there's 30 branches for each branch being generated. So yeah, as you get up, you get some quite big numbers going on. Segment splits is a useful one. Allows the branches to split, sort of like the trunk, and you can, as you turn that up, you get more branches that split and stuff. So yeah, that's useful to have. Split angle affects the segment splits, so you can play with that and create some weird looking stuff. I won't have any of that. Split angle variation is just to do with the seeds, and the amount of difference per seed for what's going on with the split angle. Down angle, as you see, affects the angle that the branches come out from the tree. And down angle variation, as you expect, is to do with the seed again. Rotate angle affects where on the tree, sort of around the tree where the branches are generated. The default's generally what you're going to be wanting, though you can play with them, and as you get to extreme numbers, sort of like that, you get some weird effects going on. So that might be some sort of weird plant thing that you want to create. So it's a possibility they might want to use that, though for the sake of generating trees, defaults are going to be fine. Branch radius ratio, I believe that defines the radius of the branch compared to the one that it came off of. So yeah, as you see, all those branches, if I turn that down, they get they're as thick at their base as, I think it's the point that they come off of. Yeah, so they don't get bigger than, though at 1.2, which is the default, it's about right. You might want them to be a bit thicker, so at 1, you might want them to be a bit smaller, so 1.5, so you've got some really thin branches going on. Those are the sort of values that you'd probably be looking at for most of the time for just general trees. Generally ignore those first 2 values, they don't affect too much. This is the length of the branches for each level, so you can affect the actual length of the trunk. Generally best to keep that at 1 and just decide the height with the scale value at the start, and then you can sort of start to create some really long branches or really short branches. Yeah, so you've got some really short branches going on and stuff. It depends on what you want. Variations just to do with the seed again and the amount of variation in everything. Curvature is, think of it as so for just curvature, if you want some nice sort of round bending branches, then as you turn the negative or go more negative, it gets more curvy, pointing up, and as you get more positive, it gets more curvy pointing down. So there's that to bear in mind. And what you can do with back curvature, it creates sort of a second rotation point along the branch. So you can create some very weird looking trees with that. It's fun to play with. Leave that at -40. Taper is it affects the width of the branch at the tip for the level. So if I turn that all the way down to 0. You see that these don't get smaller at all. It's generally better to keep that on 1 because these ends don't get capped. So if you got it at 1 or a very, very small value, you can't really see into the branch. It's not going to cause you any issues. Curve resolution you can use to just make your branches a bit smaller without using that auto handle type. So as you turn that up, you get some nice smooth looking branches without having to worry about everything else. And if you turn that up on the trunk, it does sort of affect where things are being generated a little bit, as you can see. So that's that to keep in mind. Pruning it creates this sort of silhouette that you can use to define the shape of your tree. So anything outside of that shape gets cut off, and it allows you to create nice, neat looking trees to sort of give it the dimension or something like that. All these settings, just if you just play with them, it's fairly easy to figure out what they do. So you can see, if you just keep an eye on this black profile, this prune width value affects the sort of the major width of everything. It's moving these 2 points out. So you can bring that in and create, some really short looking tree. Prune width peak affects the height of that point there that you can see, this point, as it's moving up and down. So have that. And the prune, the power affects the curvature of everything that was going on. So as I turn that up to 1, it sort of creates a straight line. And as I bring that down about 0.5, it's a fairly nice curve, and then it sort of starts to flatten out and get a bit weird as you get to 0. So generally sort of 0.4, 0.5 is about a nice rounded value, and then the same for this guy down here. So you can create a fairly sort of a rounded looking tree like that. You probably want to extend the length of the branches then. Yeah, so that's a ridiculously large number. Yeah, if that's at 1, then everything past that curve gets cut off. You can create a fairly uniform looking tree. Generally I just like to create some messy looking trees that are completely natural, so I keep pruning off, but it can be useful. I'll just skip over these for a second and quickly show you how to use the armature to make animation. So if you turn on use armature, you got this armature that creates bones along each segment of each branch, and you can animate those independently if you want. So you got a little birdie sitting on the end of a branch and you need it to wiggle as the bird jumps off, then you can do that. If you turn on armature animation here, it's going to give you a sort of generated movement of the armature. Sort of is moving in the wind. So if you've got a fairly gusty day, the default's going to be fine. Wind speed sort of affects the amount of movement that's going on, and the wind gust, the best way to think of that is variation. So every now and then it'll go more than or less than the wind speed. So you can create some weird looking things with silly values. But at about a wind speed of 1, I've got a bit of movement left and right, and then you can affect the speed of everything that's going on with frame rate. So I like the sort of the final amount of motion, but it's going there too quickly. So maybe I'll turn that up to 5. So things are just sort of slowly moving about. Maybe you can turn it up to 10. And possibly bring that down to 0.5. And I've got this sort of gently moving in the wind stuff going on. It's generally better to do all this with only a couple of levels to figure out the amount of motion, because it does get quite memory intensive because there's a lot of bones going on. When you got all the extra branches coming off from level 3 and level 4, and then you got all the leaves as well that you can bring in, they all get bones and stuff, so it's a good idea to just sort of figure out the motion before you get all those extra levels in, or just sort of turn them off whilst you're figuring this part out, and then you can turn it all on, and then it's probably generally best to not have an animated scene like this constantly going with all that stuff going, because it's not going to be able to see much. It'll all be more apparent after you render and stuff. So I'll just turn that off for now, and I'll turn levels back up to 3 on branch splitting, and then turn show leaves on. And initially you got these hexagonal leaves. I generally don't use hexagons because the textures that I use are just square, which is what computers like. So if you turn them onto rectangular, you can just map a square texture to that and not worry that it's going to fit properly and everything. You can affect the sort of distribution, the way it distributes along each branch, just through these presets. It's hard to see. It just sort of a different way. It doesn't really affect the general density of everything, but you can just sort of make sure you get, maybe you need something to look right from a specific angle, so one of these will probably sort of fills in around there a bit better, so there's that. Leaf scale is the size of the leaves. If you're finding out problems with the amount of leaves is slowing down your system, you can probably say turn that down to 15 so the bit's more sparse, but just turn this up a little bit. So the leaves might be a little bit unnaturally big, however it sort of just covers up everything and sort of saves on memory. That's a good tip. Leaf scale X generally don't need to worry about unless you've got a sort of non-uniform texture. Generally for your texture you want a square texture, so probably sort of 512 by 512 and down, so 512 by 512, 256, 256, 128, 128, that's the sort of thing. If you've got something that's different sort of scale is the best way to think of it, you can affect this, and it sort of 0.5 you get these thinner leaves, I think, or possibly fatter. Yeah, well you can see here as it affects the scale on those leaves. So yeah, the smaller I get these really thin looking leaves. That might be what you want, but generally you're going to be defining the shape in the actual texture using the alpha mask anyway, so you don't really need to worry about that. I'm just going to turn scale back down and bring the amount of leaves back up, so that looks alright. And the thing to remember is as soon as you start selecting objects outside of this window here, you're going to lose the ability to change everything. So make sure you get your tree looking how you want it to look before you move on to texturing and stuff. So now I'll select this and go to here. Yeah, so as you can see that's all disappeared now. So I'm just gonna quickly create a leaf texture. I generally have the specularity off. Turn on the transparency alpha 0 because that's going to be affected by the texture. Go to texture, create a new one, image, open. It's just a tree leaf on my desktop. So that's got an alpha mask around it where in the actual image everything is transparent except for this leaf, and it's saved as a target. You can just quickly do that in GIMP if you download an image. When I downloaded these, they weren't square, so I had to make a square texture first, or square image, and then paste the leaf onto that with a transparent background. I want UV coordinates. Pre-multiply just keeps things nice. And turn on alpha down here. And that should be leaves textured. I'll just turn on texturing there. And in the properties, turn on GLSL, and you can see all these leaves are working fine. So they look pretty cool. The alpha mask is working, and the texture's working. So that's useful. When it comes to lighting, I generally find it's a good idea to have, like, sort of, as well as the rest of your external lighting, a couple of lights actually within the leaves at a fairly sort of low intensity. Just sort of makes the internal leaves a bit brighter and a bit more seen, rather than just sort of the outside leaves getting light and then everything being black, which isn't very useful. The thing with the textures or the materials, it's probably a good idea to turn on receive transparent so that the leaf shape actually is received. I'll just turn that on the trunk as well. So receive transparent for the trunk, all the actual branches and everything. So that allows the leaf shape to be actually cast as a shadow rather than just the square of the polygon. And finally, just a quick texture for the trunk. Go with desktop, got trees texture there. And you generally want the coordinates to be object, as that is what you get a best result from. It's sort of hard to see in the viewport, it all gets a bit stretched, but as you sort of just bring in a light. So yeah, as you render, you'll see the texture actually coming up alright. It looks fine. Probably want to turn on a bump map and stuff. Not a lot of specular really needed for bark. I think that just about covers everything. I'll just quickly show you. There's a few trees that I quickly threw together. That's probably 15-20 minutes worth of work. There's just 3 different leaf textures on those trees. And as you can see, sort of maybe the lights that are actually in this tree are a bit too much. Maybe I think there's one about there and one about there. I'll probably just turn this one down a little bit to get a bit more variation in what's going on around here. But this one looks alright. So we've got a good amount of leaves on the outside that are getting light. There's also some that are sort of deeper within the tree that look alright. And this one looks okay as well as far as lighting. And yeah, you can quickly create different shapes. So it's sort of more of a standard sort of Christmas tree, whereas that's more of a sort of a wild, just sort of tree that's around. I don't know a lot about different species of tree, but it's quite possible to accurately create all the species that you want to. I think that just about covers everything. So yeah, I hope you found this to be useful. Leave me any comments for whether or not you found this useful and stuff like that. If you'd like to request any tutorials, please feel free to. I will do my best to take up on any requests. And until next time, good luck and have fun.